heightened tensions and job losses, and then George Floyd and racial and equity issues that are rising to the surface. There's all sorts of things that are happening, and people are stuck at home, or they're working from home, or they're just online more. And so everyone is wading into social media, and sometimes it's feels like it's not worth it to be on there. I am in a neighborhood. It is, we do have an HOA. It's very small. Our dues are very small every year. And one of the benefits of that HOA, or perks, or just part of what comes with it, is you get to get on this Gmail newsletter. And I was all about it when we first moved in 5 years ago. And this year I had to unsubscribe, or last year. And it was because I was getting too involved and too worked up over what people with too much time on their hands were writing in those emails. It's a lot like social media right now. People with a lot of time on their hands, a lot of opinions, and they're sharing those thoughts. But now, as I walk around the neighborhood, and we've got this cute little lending library, I'm sure you've seen them. They're little boxes where you can leave a book and you can take a book. I've read 3 books out of it this summer. And then there's somebody obviously building a house, and I know nothing about it. And if I were on that newsletter, I would. So I told my daughter last night, who's 12 and not yet immersed in social media, I was going to get back on that newsletter, but I was not going to get immersed. I was just going to read it and then put it aside and just take it for information. And that's a little bit like an analogy for how I want you all to approach social media and your roles as executive directors. Because if you get too swept in it, if you get too tied in and sucked into the emotion of it and the political nature of it, you will get burned out. You won't want to be on it. It's a marathon sort of situation, and then you've got to sort of steel yourself for the ugliness that comes, the happiness that comes, all of the ups and downs with it, and make sure that you're not taking it in too personally and you're using it for what works for you. So like the newsletter for me, now I can figure out who's moving in, who put that nice little book exchange up, and thank people, but I don't have to get involved in who's cutting down too many trees or has too many cats. So is it worth it? First of all, we need to look at what your goals are. So thank you to those of you who completed my survey and told me a little bit about what your goals are. And I'm going to share some of those as we go through here. You want to know how to do this better. And with an ever-changing algorithm and landscape and a lot of these platforms, it's constantly evolving. So it helps to kind of study up on it and know how to do it better. And a lot of it is almost taking a page out of an anthropological approach, really studying what people are doing, what people are saying, who's gravitating towards your page, who's looking for information, and then responding in that manner. You also want to be able to develop a game plan. We're moving in too many different directions and not getting enough done. How many of you that I can see, raise your hand if that's what it feels like for you? Yeah, it gets so, yeah, Martha had to turn her camera on to raise her hand for that one. It does get a little overwhelming, but especially if you're on multiple platforms, you can feel like, ugh, I've got so many balls in the air just with what I'm doing anyway. And now I've got to figure out how to, do I respond? Do I not respond? What do I share? How do I share it? And trying to get a game plan together. So I hope at the end of this, we walk away with just some really concise things that I want you to focus on. And if you can just focus on those things, you might survive the next few months of weirdness that's going to be on social media, and then be able to continue on that runway to smoother social media marketing. Some of you want to know effective strategies for marketing the organization's mission and brand, and that is as it relates to social media. Social media is a very effective way to make sure you're conveying what your organization's mission and your brand are. When you don't use social media, let's say you're on social media, but you're not using it to convey the elements of your brand, what's going to happen is other people might start dictating what your brand is for you. And you want to make sure you're always controlling that message. And if you have a platform, you can certainly do that. You can take control of that and make sure you're sharing things that are part of your brand. if you remember from Friday's session, one of the elements of a brand story that I brought forward was that you're an economic powerhouse, or you're an economic development partner, or you're about economic competitiveness. So if that's part of your brand story, think about what you would share on social media that supports that. You would share the latest information about new business and industry moving into your region. You would share information about workforce development, about job training, about even just information on what the economy in general is doing. As a neutral provider of information, you're providing value. When you're related to or have some role in any of that economic development coming into your region, great way to tag your partners and say, we are so excited to be a part of this. And that goes on your Facebook or your Twitter page to get that out. But that's, again, supporting your brand. But if all you're ever posting is, and these are good too, don't get me wrong, birthdays at your organization, or volunteer work, or your latest event for getting public input, people may not get a clear picture of it. So when you land on what those brand story elements are, always pick some elements or real life stories or information or data to share that supports that, in addition to the fun cultural stuff, because people do want to see who works in your organization. They do want to see that you're nice, friendly people and you celebrate birthdays. You know, they do like that, but not all of it. That shouldn't be everything that's part of your social strategy. You also want to know ways to teach staff to protect your brand so that you don't have to micromanage post. That gets old fast. How to better coordinate social media with your website. And in other words, how our communications can flow better. That is something that some can feel like you're herding cats sometimes, where you're trying to make sure what someone besides you is saying on social media on your behalf, and how it's related to your website. Is everything flowing together? And ideally, you do want to refer people back to your website. You want to refer them to your website so that they can get to know you as an organization better. Keeping in mind your website is up to date, has a strong, fresh look, conveys your brand. You want to reinforce that, but at the same time, you don't want to just always just put posts out that never connect back to your website, because then you're not bringing them back home, so to speak. And then the micromanaging post, I'm going to get into that a little bit later, and talk in more detail about how we can handle that, because that is hard. Alternatives to what we already do. And then this one I love. This is your goal for this, for what you want to get out of this session. Everything. I don't know that I'm going to meet that expectation, but I will try. Anything else that I missed? Martha, is anybody putting anything in the chat? I'm not sure why I can't see that today, but
I don't have anybody that has chatted anything.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I also asked you in the survey what your experience is like so far, because I like to know who I'm talking to and what level of experience you have, what your feelings are, or desires are, but most importantly, how has this experience been for you when you're on social media? And this one really made me laugh out loud, but good, bad, and sometimes ugly. I would say that's true for most people. Fulfilling at first, and now it is often a plague I try to avoid. This one is great as well. Icky. This has been your experience. And this, I think, is just a symptom of where we are in 2020. There's a lot of disinformation or misinformation and focus on political issues. And over in the years I've worked with you all, you really try not to be political. You really try to be the Switzerland of your region, and someone that is neutral and can convene. So it is important for you to rise above the fray and make sure you're not dipping into political issues, but that's a lot of what's out there right now and what a lot of us are experiencing. And then I have some positive ones as well. It's been very positive as we've made significant strides in about elevating our presence since the 2018 fly-in. I'm happy to hear that. I think that's good. And there are a lot of positives that can come out of social media. I don't want to sound like I hate it, although I kind of do, but I don't want to sound like I think you shouldn't do it. I think it is important, and it is a very easy tool to build your brand, solidify your brand, and insulate you and engage friends out there so that if you were to be vulnerable at some point, you've got some friends that you can rally. And it's a great way to get instant information out there. I think also what I have seen during COVID is that it can be valuable in getting the latest information on testing or case counts or updates or, services for maybe your aging population or for some of your job training situations. And for some of you, it's really expanded your ability to reach a different group of folks, and I'm glad to hear that. Most of you, when I asked who you're trying to reach, it's, general community, stakeholders, partners, things of that nature. And it's important that even you go a little beyond that if you can, depending on the platform. And that's where it's helpful to share those human interest stories, story about someone that works in your office and then their neighbor reads about it. And then maybe their neighbor likes the page and then they'll get more information on the work that you're doing. And they'll understand, oh, they really do a lot for this region. And then that builds upon that ability to reach other people. So when I start talking to folks about social media and having it be purposeful, it's important to understand the rules of engagement and understand how we should behave on it, what's within our control and what's not within our control. So let's get into that. What's within our control? Well, your website, that's within your control, unless it gets hacked, but let's say it never does. But your website is within your control. You can control what messaging you put on your website. You can control how your brand is portrayed on your website. And you can control all the very minutia of information on there. As it relates to social media, if you're always directing people back to your website, you're sending them to a verifiable, accurate source. You're not just putting information out there that doesn't have any backup to it. You're sending them back to your website. Maybe you've gotten an update or you're updating your SEDS, or you've gotten a new economic development report, or you've had a CARES grant come through and you need to get information out. You can put that blurb on Facebook or Twitter, but it needs to go back to your website. The application needs to be on your website. The resources need to be on your website. And then in addition to that, most importantly, what you share is under your control, unless you've got some rogue employee, and that's where we can go into some policies around that. But what you share is under your control. And then when you do have someone with some off-the-wall comments or things that just seem out of place, how you respond is just most definitely within your control. If you respond, how you respond. Have any of you had situations on social media where you've had people attack or write inappropriate comments or come at you in a very negative way after you've posted something that you thought was completely wonderful and benign? Anyone? You can either say it out loud, take your mic off, or unmute your mic, or put it in the chat.
Yes.
What was it?
Comments on the need for us in the first place. That's always an interesting one.
Well, that's fun. Yes. Comments on the need for you in the first place. And how did you handle it?
I ignored it.
Okay.
Let it go.
And what was it related to, Scott?
It was a housing issue.
Okay. So ignoring it is one approach. There is another where you can, I don't know if Scott, you're managing your Facebook or someone else or your social media, but you can have a standard response already written out so that whoever is managing that can respond with, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your hateful opinion. No, you don't say that, but thank you so much for engaging with us. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Please contact, and then give a number for them to call, because you want to get them off Facebook or off your social media platform as quickly as possible. Used to, you could private message them, but you can't do that anymore. So it all has to be very transparent. So you want to have a standard, thank you for this. Let's talk. Let's talk more. Here's our number. And you put it back on them. Okay, if you're really that concerned about our organization, we're happy to talk with you. Come for a tour. Let's go for a ride around town. Well, not now, but let's have a tour with a mask on, and let's show what you do. Or here, I'll email you our latest annual report. But make sure you engage back on that level of a thank you, let's talk sort of approach. Anyone else?
Yeah, it's Chris over in South Carolina.
Hey, Chris.
We did an event in 2018 where we launched some balloons, and some environmentalists had a lot to say.
I remember that. And as I recall, did you respond on your social media account?
I did.
How did that go?
Overall, well, it initially kind of started to spiral, but I just owned that we could do better. And this is not our norm to do things detrimental to our region and environment. And then I engaged with you, and we put out a plan of what we were going to do. We're basically owning it and saying in the future, we're going to do a road cleanup, and we won't use these balloons moving forward. And then it died from there.
That's awesome. You kind of put a pin in that balloon for them, and it just deflated. You're the ideal crisis communication client, because you go ahead and you admit, okay, this is what we did wrong, and here's what we're doing to learn from it, and here's our next steps. And you put that out there, and it just deflates. It just takes all the air out of their hot air balloon, and they can't come at you anymore. And as you experienced, if you start engaging in debating too much on Facebook, it will spiral out. It will go down. So as quickly as you can just sort of neutralize it and say, thank you so much for your concern. We'd love to talk more about it. Call us at, and then you talk to them, or you have someone that would be willing to talk to them. That is a great way to handle it. Well done. Anyone else?
This is Anthony. I would say, occasionally we'll get like a bad review on, Google or something like that. It's usually a public housing client or someone like that had to be told no, and they weren't happy with the outcome or something. And what we usually try to do there is express like what we strive for. We're sorry you had a bad experience. We strive for excellent customer service. Please contact the program director to discuss your situation to see if there's a resolution or something like that. And keeping in mind, the audience really is everybody else that would read the review as much as it is the person that we're responding to.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent way to handle it. Sometimes with Facebook, I've told certain clients, just turn your reviews off, so people can't review on Facebook. But with Google, you can't do that, and you don't really want to do that. And if you do get those bad reviews like that, I think you handled it really well, because you're right. Other people will look at it later and want to read what you said in response. And if you ignored it, then that doesn't look good for your organization, but it sounds like you handled it beautifully. And perhaps you could go about getting someone who's had a positive experience to write a positive review. So then that outweighs any negatives. If all you have are negatives, and it's simply because, as you know, the people that are more likely to write a review are the people that are mad. So and if that's all you have on your public facing digital footprint, then it's going to look like that's all you are. So I would really work on internally, even with your department leaders and outreach workers, asking folks if they have had a positive experience, would they mind writing a Google review? There are some very slick sort of automated options out there. I get it from my daughter's piano instructor from her school of music. They send me an update. What do you think? It's a survey. You could send a survey in SurveyMonkey. And if you get a positive one, then you can respond to them and say, hey, would you mind writing a Google review? Here's the link. And you send them a link to that. So that's one way to get those out. Just, send some surveys out routinely or periodically. But it sounds like you handled that really well. I'm going to move on. So the other element that we can control are the number of accounts we have. And I'm not talking necessarily about, you've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I wouldn't think you're on TikTok or Snapchat, but those are some other ones out there. LinkedIn. Where I find some issue is when within your organization on Facebook, you have your overall COG or organization account. And then within that, there's an aging account. There's a workforce board account. There's a senior support group account, but there are a lot of accounts. And so what happens when I talked last time about a deeper dive into social or into marketing and really trying to have a strong brand, when you do that, and I know that was a trend a while back, you risk diluting your overall voice. You risk diluting your brand, especially if your overall brand Facebook page maybe has 200 likes, the other one has 50, and another one has 20. You could be combining all of those into one account and just give updates for those particular departments on your master Facebook page, rather than having multiple accounts, because then people get confused, or they're going to think the Workforce Development Board has nothing to do with your organization, or the aging services has nothing to do, or transportation planning has nothing to do with your organization. In reality, it does. It has everything to do with it. You are that oversight entity, and people need to know without you, that particular service may not exist. And so it's helpful, in my opinion, if you can have one master account and maybe you figure out different ways to update people on those different services or entities so that they recognize, oh, this all goes together. And a really easy way to do that, because people are visual and they don't like to read anymore, is that on your cover image, you could have images of the different types of services, departments that you provide to your community. It's a very visual, oh, they do that, and that. There's all these different things that you do. And then in your about information, I'm talking about Facebook here, make sure you fill all of that out. Tell people about all of your services. Tell people everything you do. And I think that can go a long way in helping to solidify that brand. I did go and look at several of your Facebook accounts. I liked several of them. And I've seen, some of you do have multiple accounts, and that's okay. There's nothing horrible about it, but I would like to see them combined. And that way you have a more consistent voice and brand. And if you have different people managing those accounts, they could simply have access or editor rights within your Facebook account and post about their information. We'll get to controlling that in a minute. There's got to be an overall calendar and understanding of how everything fits together. But those sorts of things can help control your message. It can help control the flow. And also, when you get into those crisis situations, maybe someone's had a bad experience with housing, as you've said, and there's some alternate page out there. If you're not monitoring that as much as you are your overall page, you may miss those negative comments, or you may miss those opportunities. So it's better to have it all in one place, because as someone said before, you've got so many balls in the air and you want to have a game plan. Make life a little easier and just have one page on Facebook rather than multiple. All right. And then I didn't add this here, but understanding what's within your control. Frequency of posting, also important to try to be as consistent as you can. I know we all get busy. Trying to figure out a system that will work within your organization, whether it's you, whether it's someone else, where you can be a little more consistent and not just post once a month, or the last time you posted was 2019, or you've just not been able to maintain it. If you're not going to be able to maintain it, it's best just not to have one at that point. But if you're able to be consistent, even if it's once a week, that's okay. Or when some new announcement comes up, that's all right as well. But there are scheduling features within most accounts, and you don't even have to buy, oh, now it's raining again. You don't even have to buy a platform like Hootsuite, which is a paid service where you can schedule out Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, everything from one dashboard. You could do that, but within Facebook, you can just use that scheduler and schedule out some posts. And let me make sure I'm going to cover that. I've got some tips on, I'm going to get to that in a little bit on just how to do that. So the things that are not in control, understanding what's in our control and what isn't. Social media platforms are not within your control. Even though you may put your name, logo, information on them, they could go away at any point, and you would lose all of that. So you want to make sure, as I've mentioned before, You're always sending people back to your website. That you control. You don't control those social media platforms. Mark Zuckerberg may decide next week he no longer wants this to exist. I doubt he'll do that because he makes a lot of money with it, but let's say he does, and it just goes away. You want to make sure that whatever you're putting on Facebook, for example, images of your event or updates, is there another way you can communicate that? Do you have another vehicle to reach people? I hope you're using some form of email marketing, because you could drop all of that into an email. Maybe it's a bi-weekly or a monthly email or a quarterly email, but make sure you're capturing that information somewhere besides just your website, and you're putting it in that form. Maybe it's an email, or you could do just a PDF newsletter, or you can put something on your website even. You can have a page on your website for latest news, and you could put information there. I don't want you to have double work, so there should be a way that it's automated, but making sure that if it's really important, you want to have it somewhere else as well. The other thing that we have a hard time controlling is what others will say, obviously. We cannot control that. As I mentioned before, what we can do is control how we respond. The best thing to do is not get totally upset over it or freak out and think it's just everywhere. Take a moment, breathe. How many people actually saw that post? How many people are paying attention to this page? And then decide, how are we going to respond? But we can't control what other people are going to say. We also can't control inaccurate information. There's a lot of that out there at the moment. So doing your best job to put out information that is accurate is going to be very important. There is this feeling of, when you're on social media, especially Twitter gets this way, it's this rush to be first. It's the rush to share the first news. And so it's always good to take a step back. You don't have to be first. You want to be accurate. So you want to make sure that you've vetted this information with multiple sources if you're going to share it, and you triple check it, and then you can share that information. But you don't have to be the first. You don't have to be the one that scoops it. You can just get the accurate information out, because you, at the end of the day, want to be a trusted resource for your region and for your community. And I would imagine your board members, elected officials, they're watching your pages as well. And they may rely on that for their news source. Some do, some don't. And you want to make sure you're feeding them accurate information. And I will say, with Twitter and Facebook, journalists use those outlets to source stories. And so if you've gotten any relationships with those, or they're aware of you putting accurate information out or updates out about your organization, could be one way to attract some media attention. So you definitely don't want to just rush to put something out there. And of course, the final biggie that we can't control is the political climate. I don't know if any of you use boosted post or pay to update posts. Randy, did you say you use that at some point? Yes. Martha, you do. I would just say for the next however many weeks before the election, you might hold off on that because there's going to be so many ads and so much white noise, you won't get the attention. It would be a waste of money. So recognize political climate and things of that nature, and maybe hold off on the boosted post, or find another way to get that information out there. We handle PR for a variety of clients, and during the first intense months of COVID, the only news anybody would cover was COVID related. And so we had to find really creative ways, if we wanted to talk about anything that wasn't COVID related, to get that information out there. It's not just political climate, it's just your context and climate, understanding what's important to people. Same thing after George Floyd, unless it had to do with protest or racial equity, our stories couldn't get covered unless there was some tie-in with that. So recognizing where we are now with election, now, it's still, COVID's still there, vaccines, flu vaccines, debates about masks, things of that nature. Stay away from that, but try and find some, I think now where I'm seeing journalists have a little more interest are happy stories, things that are positive. They want to break from sort of the heaviness that we felt in 2020, but you can always tie things back to what's relevant. And I think that's my point there, is just making sure you're understanding what the climate is. And if your post falls flat, maybe you post it in the morning and you didn't realize something happened the night before, some major event that took everybody's eyes off your page and you're not getting any engagement, just recognize that. Maybe take it down, post it another day when it's a little less hectic. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're looking at your analytics and your post data, who's looking at it, how many views you had, how many times it was shared. If it had very little engagement, maybe take it down, repost in a different way on a different day, and look at what is relevant to people.
Hey, Erica, before
Yes.
you move to the next section, back when you were talking about things you can control, the number of accounts,
Mm-hmm.
there's a question in the chat about this too. Is there a way to combine the accounts, or like what's the actual mechanical way to do that?
There is, I believe, a way to combine. You're talking about on Facebook. There is a way to combine those accounts, but there's also, you could just let the people know on one account, we're going to be moving over to this other account, and export who liked your page. Like, make sure you know who liked that original account or the one you're closing, and invite them to like the other account. You can do it before you close it. You could just make sure everyone likes that other account. Do it over the period of a week or so people are not surprised, because people aren't on it all the time. Some people are. There are a lot of people on Facebook all the time, but some people maybe hop on once a week or once every few days. But make sure you're doing posts for at least a week that say, we're going to be combining and moving this account over to the home account. Please make sure you like us, stay up to date, and then you can track that progress moving them over, and then close that account down.
Is there any logic to picking the one that has the most followers to keep, or should you move it to your main agency presence no matter what?
You could keep the one with the most followers. I think, I haven't checked in a while about renaming it. You could rename it to your overall organization, but I would need to do a little research on that just to make sure. But that's an option. People have renamed a page. So you could rename it to your organization page if that's the one getting the most traffic or the most eyes on the page. I would want to know though, why is that one getting more traffic or eyes on the page, and do a little investigation there as to what's more engaging about that page as opposed to the other one. What are you posting on that one that gets people more excited? And don't stop doing that, but then weave in some of the organizational information.
Thanks.
Anything else within that vein, or anything else I've covered? All right. We're going to move along to strategic engagement. You like my little battleships? I had a game theme last time too. This is making sure that we're understanding the key areas here of purpose. Why are you on? And an audience. And so let's go to purpose. For your purpose, most of you, as I mentioned, said you want to inform and update, talk about services, events, get public input, announce about any grants that you have available, or like your revolving loan fund, any of that information, jobs. You want to engage, again, that's getting public input and letting people know about your projects. You might want to really, well, I would encourage you to define what is your purpose for each platform. So for Twitter, it could be just quick updates related to economic development, because I find that a lot of economic developers are on Twitter. A lot of journalists are on Twitter. Elected officials are on Twitter. Anything that rings a bell for those groups, that's your focus on Twitter. And then on Facebook, maybe it's more community people. If you look at demographics, you're not really going to reach a lot of young people on Facebook, but you will reach their parents. You will reach 55 and above. So if there are projects that matter to those folks, you can reach them. You will reach small businesses on Facebook, because that's an easy advertising outlet for them. And so that's one way that you can reach them. There are great tools to figure out when you're doing a boosted post, you can have very specific demographics about who you want to reach, and really try and test that, do some testing to see if you're reaching them or not. Are there any other reasons that you all are on social media that I didn't mention?
What are your
Another,
suggestions for LinkedIn?
yes.
What types of stories to put on LinkedIn? I struggle with that sometimes.
LinkedIn is a hard one, and I have to admit, for formation, we have a terrible LinkedIn presence. But what I do have is more of a strong presence for myself. So you might want to consider for LinkedIn, is it for the executive director or is it for the organization? Certainly for the organization, where I've seen some organizations be successful, and you're not alone in struggling with this. This is a tough one for a lot of people, a lot of organizations, is they use it for recruitment. They use it for talent acquisition. They use it to post jobs and update folks on opportunities for employment. Others may, if you want to be a thought leader in a certain realm, maybe the organization is posting information about economic development or about revolving loan fund or small business. But again, I feel like most people on LinkedIn are at a executive director to executive director level, or CEO to CEO level. Or it's people looking for jobs. So thinking about who's on LinkedIn, what's going to be relevant for them, I think for me, I would say for executive directors, that might be more of a personal account for you than the organizational account, because it's hard to maintain all of those. If you've got Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, if you're doing a personal account for LinkedIn, you're probably going to have an easier time managing that and updating it. You could share information you're finding interesting and useful, keeping in mind that you are the executive director, you represent that organization. People will interpret that as an organization view, but you could become that thought leader in a particular area where you need to demonstrate value, or you need to show that you are a vital part of that regional framework and fabric. When you're trying to then also post as the organization, it gets almost duplicative sometimes. So it could be, I've seen some organizations like COGS or healthcare, larger healthcare organizations, they post about new hires and welcoming this particular person, or job postings, or a new service, or opportunity for small business. I think those could be managed as an organizational page, but keeping in mind it may not be as active as your personal page. So that tends to be how I've seen LinkedIn work and how people treat it and have the most success with it. The most successful accounts I've seen are usually personal accounts.
Yeah, so Scott Dadson is echoing that in the chat. He says, we only use Facebook. Several of our managers use LinkedIn to push some issues of the organization on their own. No harm, no foul so far. And then Mark Stevens says, we also struggle with LinkedIn, but we use Instagram and have a much more active following there than on Facebook.
Yes. Instagram is like the very friendly cousin of Facebook. And you can post through Facebook to Instagram, because there's not a lot of back and forth on Instagram, and it's just fun photos and images. I'd be curious to hear what you're posting on Instagram.
We use it really kind of as a behind the scenes thing with the district, since we're somewhat poorly understood, or the average Joe doesn't really know what we do.
Right.
But it's a far more active interaction with our partners than Facebook. So that's why it's really our first place to post.
I think that's great. And I would echo that that's a smart way to do it. And it sounds like you've done just, sort of on the fly evaluation, but it when it works, when people are engaging, and okay, this platform seems to be ringing a bell, because I do think people are a little tired of Facebook. And so Instagram is sort of that nice, easy platform that you don't have to get too involved. You can just look at images. And I think it is a great way to show the behind the scenes view of your organization, because it is hard to understand it for the layperson as far as what you do. So if you're showing your work in action, I think that's a brilliant way to do it. I'm going to go back to Scott's point, no harm, no foul, a little later. and just make sure you've got some safeguards in place. But I do feel like having your leaders, your senior leaders or your department leaders, if they are on LinkedIn posting about information related to your organization, I think that is a smart way to do it. I just want to put some guardrails up and make sure that people understand policies related to that. And we've talked a little bit about audience as well here, making sure you know where people are and who you're talking to, and what kind of information they want. And again, that's where analytics comes in, and making sure that you're looking at those, looking at your data from time to time is going to be very helpful. Several of you in the survey said that you manage your social media for the organization, and then some of you have someone that does it. And then I think it's sort of a kind of a toss up for some others out there. For those of you doing it, are you feeling like you're successful with it? You can write in the chat.
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. For some folks, I think they got into it early on because they felt like they had to. Everybody had to be on social media. You got to be on social media. You have to be there. If you're not, there's something wrong with you. But I feel like I want to always stress, if you're just checking that box to be on there, you're better off doing this: calling people, emailing them, sending them a letter. Those are very meaningful ways to engage with folks. Certainly you're not doing it with a megaphone like you are on a social media platform, but if you get a strong enough email marketing database together, you're reaching the right people and you're making sure your information is out there. The difference is with social media, you are able to reach people that may not be on your email list, that may not know who you are and need to know who you are. So that's why it's a good balance. But I always want to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, that it's the right purpose, you've got the right tools in place, and you're able to have that capacity to be consistent, as I mentioned earlier. And sometimes organic is fine to say, oh, I've got something new I need to add today. But if that's the only way you're doing it, then you risk only posting maybe once every 2 weeks when you think about it. And it's better if you can go ahead and map out what you want to say and be consistent with it. And then also making sure you're measuring your results. You can look on the back end of Facebook. You can even see on LinkedIn how many people look at your post and engagement that you have. You can evaluate what is meaningful to people and what are they responding to, what kind of post get the most interaction. Photos and videos are always going to get more interaction than just words written. Sharing a news article always gets good interaction. Yes, Martha.
All right, the chats are coming in now. I'll let you know.
All right, what do we have?
So Chris McKinney says, when I did do it, it was okay, but it was too time consuming. It has worked much better, all in caps, once we designated a staff person to be the focal point. And then Kira writes, I manage all of our accounts. Since COVID-19, I'm having to do more digging for posting relative to articles or information because everything is revolving around politics and COVID. We still are posting a few times a week, just have been seeing a decline in finding great content to share other than our normal information, other than our information.
Okay. All right, Chris, I'll start with your comment. Excellent. That's great. I think the sooner you can offload it from your plate, the better. I used to post for our accounts and I do not anymore, just simply because I stunk at this part, at the consistency, because I couldn't make time for it because I was focused on other things that in my view are more important for the work I'm doing. So we made sure we have someone that manages that and we give them guidelines and some consistency goals there. And we always measure results. I do go back in and measure those results. So I'm glad, Chris, that you've got someone that can do that because it is time consuming. And I want to make sure you're looking at results as well and not just relying on someone else to tell you about it, but just taking a look every once in a while or popping on your page as a viewer and seeing what does that look like or why haven't we posted in a little while, because that is important for you to at least understand what your posts are, how your posts are landing and the content behind them.
Hey, Eric, just real quick. So they give me a monthly report on metrics on that, and I routinely monitor it because everybody else knows if they say something that's not right and not accurate, I'm quick to say, hey, I need for you to adjust that because the implications and impacts could be swift and negative. So I very routinely monitor our social media, all of our social media.
That's excellent. How much time would you say you're spending doing that monitoring, Chris, each week?
In a day, I go on probably once or twice for about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. And I think, for some people, it feels like, for me, sometimes I might go down a rabbit hole if I'm going on there to monitor, and then I get sucked into something. It's good to have some time limits and make sure you've got a little clock that says, okay, get off, because you need to just quickly look at those important metrics, those key performance indicators that you might have in mind, and make sure that you are, you're taking a good look at that. And then also making sure in your overall organization, social marketing, you're making connections. You're connecting back to your website. You're connecting to events. You're tagging some of your partners. You're pulling links from articles. Or you're pulling articles, sharing it, and saying, this is the role we played in this, or we're so happy, we're honored we got to play a part in this, so that people understand you are part of that overall solution. It's not just you're sharing information from someone else. You can always share information from someone else just as a kudos, especially to your board members, your elected officials. They love to have that sort of attention paid on them. But it's also good to make sure people understand your role in these efforts.
So Erica, on that note, Anthony's asking about the balance of sharing content about and from your organization versus the reshare idea. Do you have a sense of percentage maybe or something that?
I do, and I need to share our best practices overview. We used to, I think we had a percentage of 30, 30, 30, and then maybe 10% of just like fun stuff. So 30% your information, 30% partners. I'm trying to remember the other 30%. And then 10% was just fun, agency stuff, organization stuff. But I can share that best practices with Martha and Anthony, and you all can share that out. I wouldn't overdo it. I'll say that. Keep it balanced. So you're not always just going me all the time. There's got to be a little bit about you, but also shining a spotlight on your partners. I know what the other 30% was. And then success stories or human interest stories that relate to your organization. Maybe it's someone that went on a site visit and they got to talk to someone who's been impacted by your work, and maybe they even had their phone out and they captured a 20-second video of that person saying, I don't know what I would have done without X, and your name goes in there and you share that. And then I'll make sure I send that to you. So that hurts my eyes. Sharpen your focus. So this is where I want to get into some of the takeaways. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm running a little long on time on what I want you all to focus on, what matters most, because you are busy. So I want you, and a lot of you have said this, platforms that yield results. If you're not seeing a lot of results, let's say you started a LinkedIn organization page and you're just not getting a lot out of it, either it's time to really focus on, I'm gonna make sure this is amazing, and you put input into that and you put some time into that, or you say, you know what, I'm gonna let that one go. I'll post as the executive director. We tend to get a lot of feedback on Instagram. I'm gonna continue to cultivate that. Facebook is kind of teetering on the edge. I'm gonna put some more input into that, see what happens over the period of a month, and see what you can get out of that, and then make some decisions. If you're on Twitter but you haven't tweeted, or someone hasn't tweeted in a month, maybe it's time to get off that, or give it to someone else in your organization that is well-versed in Twitter, whose job is maybe in economic development or workforce development, and they're going to connect with people and you trust what they're going to be able to say. Let them have it. Let them take on that account. But really look at the platforms that yield results and don't worry about the ones that don't. Put those aside. Social media policies and guidance. This is really important if you do have other people posting for you. It's important that they know what your tone is, your brand consistency, and they know what the guidance is for responding to negative comments. For one of my clients I work with, there's a team of us. There's a social media person, but then I get every negative comment I get a heads up about, and then I go on and I look and evaluate. You never have to rush to respond. Ever, ever, ever. Don't rush to respond. Take a moment, look at it. I do a little bit of stalking. I see where is that person in the grand scheme of things. Who are their friends? Who do they know that's going to influence my organization? Who might be influential? Are we vulnerable? Are we a worthy counterpart to that person? Do your homework on the person making the comment before you just automatically say something back. You can do a holding statement, and I mentioned that before. Thank you so much for your thoughts. We appreciate that. We truly value what you have to say. Please give us a call at. But meanwhile, do some homework and find out who that person is, what their motivations are. You can pretty quickly get an idea of what kind of person you're dealing with just by looking at their Facebook page. And a lot of people do not have them locked down. And I'll get into that in a minute for your own accounts. But many of them are wide open. So you can see every cat meme they've ever posted, every person they're friends with. And then you can make draw some conclusions and figure out, okay, is this person just like got too much time on their hands and they're just kind of spouting off? Or do I really need to worry about this person? And then you make some choices. But your person managing your social media needs to know if something like that happens, if maybe it's really inflammatory, they need to screenshot it and send it to you immediately so you can be part of that solution. So they're not just making those decisions on their own unless you trust them 100% and they know exactly what to do. I would want you to be a part of that sort of decision-making process. And again, reminding them they don't have to rush to do it. Also in the social media policy arena, and this is where Scott was mentioning no harm, no foul, making sure that is okay, making sure they know, your employees know that if they have works at isothermal or works at High Country, then you've got to understand as an employee posting, people could interpret that you are speaking on behalf of the organization. And then you've got a whole nother set of issues with PR. So they need to understand that if they've got that on their profile, they either need to say, these are my opinions and not the opinions of, or they may remove that. But a lot of people, if you're in a small town, they know who they work for, but they just need to understand what they say can impact their employer. That gets into strange HR territory, and you can't dictate what people do on their private time. But if you have a social media policy in place that says you are allowed to post on your personal accounts, but they will be evaluated to see if they negatively impact this organization or some language like that, and I can share some general language, then you've put them on alert that, okay, you can post, but if it impacts the organization, we may have to take action, because people will find out where they work and they can come and find you and say, I can't believe you let this person say this, and they need to be fired, and I want it done immediately, and I want their head on a platter. I mean, people get so worked up, and so you need to be prepared for that you could have that exposure and how to respond. And just as Chris did with his balloon situation, acknowledging, yes, we're aware this employee said that, these are the steps we've taken. They're now in anger management classes, and we won't let that happen again, or something like that. You know, certainly you don't say, oh, we fired them, but I think there has to be an understanding that sometimes people's emotions can get out of control and they say things that could impact you. Understanding brand consistency as well. You know, if you've got someone else posting for you, even if you just give them bullet points, these are the buckets of information we want you to post about. We want you to post about job opportunities, training, transportation planning, water and sewer, you know, whatever it is. These are the things that are important to our organization. If you want to post, these are the topics that are approved to talk about on behalf of our organization. and I'm going to skip into another area here. And then obviously make sure they've got the right training and you're looking at metrics and evaluation. These are the things that matter if you're going to be on social media. Making sure also that they understand the tone. Are you very professional in your outward facing language, or are you informal and you use slang? You know, you have to determine if someone's posting for you that they've got the right tone and they're representing you in the right way. One way to help with that brand consistency and tone, and I'll go to this page, is making sure that perhaps you have an editorial calendar, and really that can be as simple as a Google sheet, and you have it all laid out as far as platform, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you have week 1 and you put the dates, week 2. And then that person who's managing your account can go in and do projected post or scheduled post. They can write down the content and a link to what they're going to share, put it in that Google sheet, and let's say every Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, they need to send it to you and you approve it, or you say, you know what, you didn't know this, but I've got this big event coming up in 2 weeks. I need you to post about that. Or you might not know this, but this department is doing this. I need you to push that out. And making sure that you're covering all your bases, and it's an easy way to do it. You don't have to have an expensive platform. Just a Google Sheet is a great way to do that, or any sort of shared document like that where you can map out and you get them to do it a week at a time. In this climate and where we are in the world today, thinking beyond a week sometimes is impossible because we don't know what's going to happen. Things are changing so rapidly. So even a week out, obviously if you have events that are a month out or 2 months out, you can certainly post about that and you know about that. But making sure you understand, or they understand, that they need to think about it and plan it out. It's not just like, oh no, it's Tuesday and I haven't posted. What can I post? And they just throw something up there. That's not the way you want to handle your social media. I'll go into a few more of these tools. We talked about a little bit about your social media strategy, understanding your purpose, your audience, understanding scheduling features and getting familiar with those. You don't have to do it all in the moment. It can be scheduled out, and that's where your editorial calendar comes into play. Google Analytics and Google Alerts. I think I've been saying this to you all for years now, making sure you have Google Alerts set up with your organization name and any other names associated with your organization, any of your department names, any of your personnel names that you might want to just see what pops up. Editorial calendar, and then email platforms like MailChimp or Constant Contact. Also excellent tools to have in your arsenal there. All right, looking at my time. I knew I might have packed a little much into this. So making it work can be challenging because an executive director's job is really never done, is it? You've always got something else that you're working on. You've got people you're managing. So that's where it's important to really lean into time management. You know, if you're going to check your accounts to see what's happening, put a time limit on that. Make sure your social media manager understands you want them to spend X amount of time per week on this. Oversight and responsibility, that's where you come into play, making sure that you are checking if someone else is posting, or you're responsible for that, that tone. You're responsible for making sure the brand is consistent and you have the oversight on that person or what's out there. And if you aren't doing that, you make sure someone else is. Your personal accounts and security, I would imagine most of you have a personal account. I did not stalk you, so I did not know if you did. I did look at your organization pages, but if you have a personal account, I would recommend that you make it private, or at least don't allow people to post to your page. Just having gone through some serious crisis issues with clients, even as the PR person, people will recognize that I am related to them. So I like to make sure people just can't come on there and say whatever they want. Now, it's still your friends and people you're connected to can, and over the years you might have amassed some friends that you don't even really know who they are, because we all accept friend requests from time to time. Go through and see who's on there. And just, I don't want to sound like the sky is falling or Debbie Downer, but I do want to make sure you're protected. I want to make sure that people don't say, oh, well, I'm going to go after that Anthony Starr. He's the one that did this with this housing thing. And then they come on and they find you, or they look at your family, or they look, you want to make sure that you're protected and able to enjoy your own personal social media, and you still can with the private setting, but just understanding people will find where you are. And then always, I mentioned this before with tone, having a professional voice, and especially if situations get a little heated or people say weird things, making sure you're leaning into that professional voice and taking the high road. And then last but not least, understanding context. It could look sunny and nice in one area and then just be completely horrible on the other side of that. So we want to make sure that you're looking at all the avenues, making sure you're tapping into your employees, even asking them, is there anything going on that I don't know about? Anything we need to be aware of, any vulnerable areas. So I was racing through that to make sure we have time to discuss. That's the snapshot of everything, and I can go back over anything if you'd like, or if you have questions at this point, we can talk more. You're all stunned.
This is Melissa again in Western Kentucky. I have one more question. On the, I know you spoke briefly about putting more economic development type information on Twitter and the feel-good stories on Facebook. In most of our articles that I put on our current events page on our website, I typically share those stories on both platforms. I word them different, obviously, because I can't use as much on Twitter. But is that not a good idea? Should I not put that out there on both platforms? Should I pick and choose which one I put where? Or do you think it's okay to push them both out on both areas?
Well, I'll respond with a question. Are you evaluating response? So when you're pushing that out on Twitter, are people liking it, commenting, sharing, retweeting it?
Some of it.
Okay.
Not all of it.
Are you getting response on Facebook?
I am, but I feel like it is more because more of our staff members are on Facebook, and if it relates to their department, they tend to share it and comment on it. So it brings back more feedback through Facebook than it does on Twitter. We have less staff on Twitter.
That makes sense, and that's good. Your staff is engaged because that does grow your audience. On Twitter, I guess I would want you to just look a little bit more on that. Any of the updates you've shared, do you ever get any follow-up or interest at anyone asking questions about it?
Very rarely.
So, I mean, you may want to reconsider what you're sharing on Twitter, and there's not going to be a huge amount of engagement on Twitter. It's more of an update, sort of quick news soundbite sort of thing. I
feel like more of our elected officials are on Twitter. So I want to make sure that they can see what we're doing as well. But like I said, we get more feedback from Facebook, and it's more of a pride thing with our staff to be able to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're proud of.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss anybody, which is why I continue to send it out through both, because I want to make sure everybody sees it. I just don't want to do information overload by putting it on both.
Well, it sounds like you've got different audiences, so you're probably okay in keeping that Twitter feed going, especially if you're changing the language and how you're posting it. And your elected officials may be reading it and just not responding, and they might miss it if you didn't put it on there. So I think if it's not taking a lot of your time and it's an easy system for you, it's probably just fine to keep doing it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sending it all out through Buffer at one time. So that works.
That's good.
Thank you.
And I like that your employees are engaged. I think I would also encourage you all to just make sure your employees know that you have the Facebook page or Instagram, and they follow your accounts, and they're able to chime in or share or amplify that. So good job on that.
Erica, this is Martha. We're doing a lot. Well, we're trying to sort of get into the habit of like planning our posts so that we're feeding in the things that kind of come up on the spot into a regular schedule to help make sure that that consistency and frequency is there.
Mm-hmm.
You have any suggestions of some of the products that are out there that help manage that, or is it just better to kind of keep a list and schedule it in a, you know, just a document or something?
Well, I do like the Google Sheet, and it can be shared with multiple people, and perhaps your department leaders or folks that have information can just review it and say, oh, I need this to be included. There are other tools out there, paid tools that you could use for that, but I think it just depends on how much budget you want to assign to it. I think Google Sheets work great in that situation. What are you using now?
A Google Sheet.
But you want something that automated it a little more, or what are you?
No, I mean, I think the thing we've been trying to kick around is like, because we have multiple people that post on our accounts in the office, like we don't have a dedicated person. We're just trying to sort of stay coordinated. So the spreadsheet has been helpful to see, you know, I think Jeremy and some other people were talking about the same, that 30-30-30 rule. I mean, make sure that on the balance, we're not swaying too heavily in one direction, make sure we're getting good balance across our program areas. And then it helps myself and another person who have kind of like review responsibility, see all the text and that kind of stuff in a single place instead of,
Yep.
you know, especially right now because we're sharing, you know, sending so many emails to each other. So it's just been helpful to kind of stay coordinated on it.
It sounds like you're doing a great job with it. I think the sheets are only as good as the information that's in them. And so if someone forgets to update it or it gets a little outdated, that's when it becomes problematic. But it sounds like you have a good routine. And if you have multiple people posting, making sure they know to give each other a heads up if there's anything controversial or any sort of sudden news that needs to be put on, there's a heads up, oh, I need to put this up. We might need to either delay this post or shift it to another day or take it down, that sort of thing. Any other questions or comments?
I'll just share that Scott Farmer has written in the chat that a lot of, kind of echoing what was said before, a lot of our state legislative delegation is on Twitter, so we're pretty active there. It seems like that's sort of an audience segment that's important. So even if there's not a lot of dialogue on Twitter, it's probably important for people to just be pushing that information out.
Yeah, I would agree. I think electeds are always on Twitter. They like to use that platform, and you're right. You're not going to get a lot of engagement with it, but you're at least keeping them informed.
Well, we want to thank Erica today for presenting, and there's been good information, really good information. I've learned several things, got good notes from today's session. We will be posting this content on the SERDI website in the next few days. I want to thank Martha for hosting all the Zoom calls for these online SERDI sessions, since we couldn't have our conference in person in Georgia. And I want to especially thank Jim Youngquist for setting everything up. He's the glue that holds this organization together, and as you all know, and is invaluable to us all. And so thank you, Jim, for everything you do for this organization. I want to thank each of you for your time today, and I hope sincerely that I will see you all in Annapolis for our next annual conference. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We also have new directors training scheduled for February in Atlanta. And for those of you that might be new directors on the call here, if for some reason we are not able to have the new directors training in Atlanta due to COVID, then our plan, our contingency is to roll that to have it in conjunction with our annual conference in Annapolis. So we've got contingencies in place. Let's really hope that Annapolis and our new director's training in February go off without a hitch. And thank you everyone for joining us today. SERDI's here for you as your professional development as executive directors. I hope you have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.